Howdy, everybody. Shasta College. How y'all doing? It's not so hot this week. We're going to get slammed next week, so take advantage of the high 90s next week, middle 110, whatever, crazy. Anyway, I hope you're staying cool and hydrated, and you're getting your assignments in. Last night was the deadline for the last essay on Shakespeare. I signed a new essay yesterday on the Dutch painters Rembrandt and Vermeer. Talk about them in a minute. Look at in and why they matter still to this day. We're still studying their works to this very day. Um, in your book, if you're reading your book, if you're coming along, it helps to have the book. It's not required, but chapter 23 covers this whole area that we're dealing with this week, which was a revolutionary area in science and philosophy, music, and and of course art, the painters. But because of different inventions that are coming along, like the microscope and the piano forte, which is an instrument that revolutionized uh, essentially Western modern music. Um, so this period's about 1550 or so to 1750 in there. So we're talking about 200 years. We're in And we're going to focus on the Netherlands and Holland, especially because that's where these two painters are, and a lot of this was going on. But then in other parts of the country, in the world, I should say, Galileo in Italy was coming up with his revolutionary idea of uh, the laws of gravity, which is a huge scientific leap forward into modern times. Um, then we have philosophies coming around because of the religious freedoms now that was spawned by Martin Luther. Uh, we've got philosophy, people are thinking, questioning, because people now are getting more educated. More people know how to read than ever before. Before, the lower classes didn't really, they worked in the trades, and they didn't really have the luxury of learning how to read or write. But things are changing now because in these port towns in Holland, like Rotterdam, ships from all over the world come in there with their goods and services, and they're bringing in ideas and culture from other parts of the world long before the internet, folks. That's how we got our knowledge was slow, the word of mouth. But we did okay. We did okay. Now it's instantaneous. Are we better for it? You tell me. Anyway, the, we all having people starting to think and discover who we are as humans, not just eating, working machines that are born. We we work, have a family, and then die. It's a lot more. There's a lot more to life than that, and we're discovering it now because we're having the luxury of time and education, and that creates more intellectual environments. People writing books. Um, this time also is a good time for music is changing. Uh, Classical music. There's this a trend called Baroque music, and it's usually considered embellished, dramatic, lots of flourishes, um, because it was the sign of the times. People are coming out. They're thinking. They're living with broader expansion of vision of their minds, of science and philosophy of life. Artists are painting incredible life like paintings depicting who we are, what our dreams are. And And the music is following that with these energetic spirit because people want to live and they want to excel and they want to have a meaningful life. And this era is this Renaissance time of this era really embraced that. Um, like the architecture also. I don't when I teach a long course, I have to I do architecture, believe it or not, uh, because that's all part of the humanities of this section. But if you look through the book, or if you have the book, you know the book I'm talking about, folks, the big one, that one. Um, the architecture is very became very fancy and very dramatic, uh, like the music, like the art, like the science. It was all following in to where the buildings we lived in, the buildings we spent time in, schools, museums, government buildings, had a flourish to it, a dramatic intricacy that we'd never seen before. People were delighted when they saw these buildings now because there was a delight to it. They just weren't living for the moment, they're living for a brighter future. There was hope. It was hopeless, very hopeful times. The Dutch painters I want you guys to focus on this week are Rembrandt. Maybe, hopefully, you've heard of Rembrandt. You've painted some of the most famous paintings on earth. And then Vermeer, who you probably might not have heard of, didn't paint that many paintings, around 35, they think. 35 paintings, whereas somebody like Pablo Picasso painted thousands. So there's a big difference. But Vermeer worked on a painting maybe for a solid year. He was a master of what they call light. Um, he painted very lifelike, simple drawings. People standing in windows, usually the light coming in. They're doing something at the window, cleaning food. Woman with pearl earrings. Maybe some of these paintings are pretty famous. Um, and he painted with what they called a camera obscura, which was a device, a box device. They put a candle in, and you could had a lens, and then actually could project onto the wall. There's no electricity in these days. They had to do everything by candles, but it could project an image on the wall, and he would on his canvas he could trace it. That's why they look so realistic. He's using help here, the technology of the time, the science of the time, to make these incredible paintings. So uh, that's one of the papers you're going to write when you go in there and look at the assignment. Choose one. Don't do both. Either choose Rembrandt or Vermeer to write your paper about. 3 to 5 pages, MLA format. Put a title page on there. Put a running header with the page numbers, and also put a uh, works cited page for where you get information. I assigned some documentaries, but the readings are in the book, chapter 23. They talk about both artists. Um, it's all over the internet, everywhere. These two artists, a ton of information on both of them. And once again, when you're writing papers, don't just give me a bio of who they were. I don't really care what school they went to or who their parents were. It's the art they created that meant everything and why it matters so much. Rembrandt was one of the most famous painters in the history of our world. He actually, at one time, he was hired by the socialites who could afford it. They would pay him very good money, and he did a lot of portraits of high society people and politicians, military people, royalty. And then he got to the point where he didn't want to do that anymore. He made a good living. Uh, he wanted to paint what he wanted to paint. And so he kind of dispelled those contracts, rejected them, and started painting what he wanted to paint. And he was a failure at that. Now, it's been uh, re-looked at all these years later, but in those, reevaluated all these years later, but in that era, people didn't want him to change. They wanted him to keep painting the style that they wanted, and he wanted to do something else. And he ended up losing everything. He went bankrupt, lost all his money, and he started burning his own paintings to punish the world, to punish himself. He became an alcoholic, wandering the town aimlessly, um, essentially died in poverty. But before then, he painted some of the most incredible works of art. If you look at some of his paintings, like the Night Watch, it almost looks like a scene from a movie. It's got action, it's got movement, it's got drama, it's got intrigue, it's got plot. Painters were painting films, cinema before the invention of the camera. They told our stories through their painting. They just weren't still lifes, they were alive, they were moving in a painting. And that's why somebody like Rembrandt or Vermeer, they captured such a human element of who we are, our essence, with oil paint. And this is the days before you just walk into Michael's shop and buy paint. You had to know how to make it. It was not easy to put this together, and yet they did, and they flourished. And both of them were in the Netherlands and Holland, especially Amsterdam. It was a hub of this new modern maturity that was where Van Gogh flourished later on. I'll be talking about that a little later as we get more modern. Um, Lots and lots of stuff are coming out of here because of the travel of other people coming to that area and the meetings and the philosophies, the conversation from other parts of the world, from Asia to Greece to Italy. So, Rembrandt, Vermeer, if you ever get to Holland, I suggest you go. I was in Amsterdam for a couple of weeks. I finished a novel there. Yes, I've written a novel that got published. Um, and I finished it there. I went there for a couple of weeks, stayed in a little hotel on one of the canals. It's a beautiful place. And that was quite a few years ago, over 10. And it wasn't that expensive. And I get discounts because I'm a teacher. You can get discounts too because you're students. Think about traveling like that. You get student discounts. You just have to have your proof of what school you go to. And I remember where I stayed. I didn't know it at the time. Literally within a half mile outside my hotel was the Rijksmuseum, which is a hugely famous museum in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, and it houses a lot of Rembrandts. So I got to see them close up. The immensity, the humanness of them was mind expanding. Um, I never got to see where Vermeer was painting. It's kind of a mystery where he was, but down the block, on the same street almost, if I remember right, was the Van Gogh Museum. And all of his history is in there. And he only painted for 10 years. We'll talk about Van Gogh later. So Holland was bustling. Uh, yes, they speak very good English there. And I suggest you go to Amsterdam. Um, you go into coffee shops. You call them coffee shops, but they're marijuana shops. You can, as long as you're in the shop, because in marijuana is legal, as long as you're not smoking it on the street. Stay within the confines of the coffee shops. It's a really broad culture where people ride bikes all the time because there's not a lot of room there to park your car. And people of all ages are riding bikes, not just for exercise like we do here in their spandex outfits, but to actually go to work, commute, all on bike. So when you get up in the morning, you go in the streets, there are hundreds and hundreds of bikes going down the streets. People of all ages, young, old, professional people in business suits. You don't see that here too much. Anyway, I hope you guys get out there and do some traveling. Things are looser now. The euro dollar is almost equal to ours. When I was there, it was about $1.40, which was higher. The inflation right now it's very almost equal at $1.10 or less. Um, it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. Find the cheap places to stay, eat the cheap food on the street, and drink some great coffee. Have a glass of wine at night, and write your novel. You could do it. Okay, I'll talk to you guys next week where we'll continue this whole era of Renaissance and what it's bringing to the outside world. It's bringing everything. Stay tuned.